Dawnbringer, Book 4, Chapter 1, In the Caverns of Darkness. Vast caverns of stone spread in all directions far beneath the earth, their only illumination the veins of precious ore that weave through the darker rock like blood vessels through the body, bringing not life, but light. And yet here light is life, and darkness is death. For ever since the Empire began to exile the dangerous, the unwanted, the criminal, whether literal or political, into these expansive underground caverns, now a prison whose width and depth is unknown, existence has been for many a struggle against encroaching death. If light is a rare thing, since wood for torches is almost impossible to come by, even more rare is all that constitutes a healthy diet. For here fruits and vegetables do not grow, and the shipments from above, as it is now called by all here in the underworld, or simply said, below, are far less than the inhabitants would need. Beasts live in the belly of the earth, that is true, and some are easy enough to trap or to hunt, rats and wraithclaws and even bats. But there are also legends and rumors of creatures deeper within that, were they to be disturbed, would bring an end to this struggle for life in a quick, if not painless, death. And yet so it happened that the beasts slumbering deep under the earth were stirred awake by the presence of man, and a war began between the exiled members of humanity and the creatures of darkness. At first, the representatives and office holders of the Valyrian Empire knew nothing of this, for they took little interest in the affairs of those imprisoned in the depths through their policy of purging. And if these exiles were slain by a power not their own, then all the better. If these underground caverns proved to be not only prison, but executioner, how favourable an outcome. For as high and as steep as are the shafts of narrow stone that connect the overworld and the underworld, it always remains possible, even if a slim possibility, that those below will find some means of escape, and, in escape, find courage to kindle the fires of revolution and resistance. But such fires, to all appearances, have been utterly quenched, and the conflict of man and beast rages almost like a blazing inferno. As many heroes as arose to fight the darkness, and as many times as the beasts were cast down, they rose up again, as if immortal, born anew from the darkness, as from some malicious seed. But heroes did arise, men and women of valor and strength, of integrity and of fidelity, unwilling to allow their brethren to die even in such a place as this. And yet, in the hearts of many also burned a flame of vengeance and of spite, mingled in with more noble aspirations. And through the very act by which the Empire sought to prevent rebellion, it actually stirred it into flame. It provided the crucible in which its enemies were forged into a force strong enough to supplant it. Eventually, the imperial officers learned of the creatures of darkness, whom old legends called Trogan and Derelion, though they originated in the land of Telmerion far to the east, where they were called Eotenga and Druidach. And they sought some way to harness these powers on their side, In fear of suffering the destruction they might bring, were they to find access to the overworld. Yet too late was this discovery to prevent rebellion, though not too late, perhaps, to crush it. For access was at last gained through a secret stair, centuries, perhaps millennia ancient, by which those exiled by the Empire could again escape into the light of day. And beholding this light once again after many years, burning in its brilliance and yet deeply desired, the rebellion began in earnest like a flame that, struggling to burn, at last finds the air and the space it needs to spread and to turn all around it ablaze. Just as the Empire learns how to find the Druidach that still live in the land of Telmerion, and to join with them in warfare against a rebellious nation on distant shores, at that very same time rebellion sparks on their own soil and among their own people. Perhaps this, after so many years of successful conquest and rule, shall be the downfall of the Valyrian Empire and the birth of a new order. Elmarie awakes with a start and sits up in bed, the vivid images of the dreams swimming before her interior vision, overwhelming and yet also elusive, like sand slipping through a sieve. No, this was no ordinary dream. It was a form of bearing, a participation in events that only recently began to unfold in the land of Valyria far across the sea. How she knows this, she cannot explain even to herself, but she simply knows and cannot doubt it. What she has seen is true, and the conflict now blazing in the land of Valyria is just as visceral, just as real, as that now playing out in their own land, crippled as it is in the two-pinced grip of Empire and Eotenga. She swings her legs off the bed and places her feet against the cold stone floor, feeling it through her thick yet worn socks, while she reaches toward a chair that sits not far away and lifts her overgarment in her hands. With a sigh, she pulls it over her head and ties it at the front before standing and looking about the room. It is dim, lit only by the embers of a dying fire and by a subtle pre-dawn light that filters in through the large window looking out over the city below. Her mind and heart are preoccupied with the impressions left from the dream, and though the images from it fade, a deeper awareness remains. Yes, she feels vividly that it was unlike any dream that she has had before, not a play of images or events before the slumbering imagination, but an inflow of knowledge from a source outside of herself. But why was this presented to her now, and why to her and not another? Reflecting on this, she realizes that granted that the knowledge communicated to her is true, it answers certain questions and reveals certain facts that are deeply intertwined with the events in which the people of Telmerion are now immersed. This, of course, was obvious on first glance, but Elmarie was so overcome with the newness of the impressions at first that only upon reflection does she understand the significance of what has been given to her. She kneels and places her forehead against the floor, praying until the sun shines full into the room, turning darkness into light. Then she finishes dressing and steps into the hallway, seeking out the room of Eldarion. In her experience, he has always risen early in the morning, so she expects him to already be awake, perhaps even to have been so for hours. And she is proven right when he answers her gentle knock on his door almost immediately.
"Good morning, sister,"
he says, looking at her with a gentle smile, though she can also read the lines of pain and compassion that mark his face.
"Good morning, brother,"
she replies, adding softly,
"It is finally beginning to feel natural to call you this, and it brings joy to my heart."
"To mine as well,"
agrees Eldarion, and then, with a glimmer in his eyes, he asks,
"Is there something on your heart, or something that you needed?"
"There is indeed something on my heart. You see, I had a dream last night, but it was unusual. It wasn't like a dream. but more like a seeing, or rather a knowing.
Why don't you come in and we can talk about it?
He says. She nods silently and follows him into his chambers, where she takes the chair that is offered to her, while he sits opposite her on the edge of the bed.
I dreamed of events occurring in the Valyrian Empire. I would have doubted them were they not so unexpected and so viscerally presented to me. What do you know of the recent happenings across the sea to the west?
Almost nothing, I'm afraid,
replies Eldarion.
There has always been a great deal of censorship regarding what the officers of the Empire allow to cross the waters and to reach us. It seems that is always the case with such totalitarianism, though only in recent times have I found the conviction and courage to call it that such leaders seek to know and control much in the lives of their subjects and yet conceal their own intentions and activity.
Even on the smallest level, that seems to me to be abuse of authority in every case,
says Elmarié.
And I fear that many think of the Creator in a similar way. As a master who keeps his distance, hiding his face and his heart, and yet controls and demands everything in the hearts and lives of his creatures. When there is no love, no communion, can it appear as anything but an excessive demand, made with force of will, with the power of might?
Eldarion nods sadly to this, but then, looking up into Elmarié's eyes, he smiles again, gently and yet firmly, and says,
But when there is love, a bond of mutual belonging, all flows in freedom, for from freedom it is born.
If only our society, the society of humankind, would follow such a truth. And yet, in this case, we belong to the Empire, but it does not belong to us. And what I have seen this night disturbs me even more, for I beheld recent, or even current, events in the land of Valyria. It appears that those who prove a danger to the society, whether a true danger such as criminals, or only those who disagree with the given policy, are being exiled into a vast series of underground caverns. These have been utilized as a massive prison for the undesirables.
A prison?
Eldarion asks.
How can people make a living beneath the earth?
According to what I beheld, they can little do so, and many perish. But those who survive have become hardy and strong, and have also risen up in rebellion, and freedom they have found at last.
Freedom?
Yes, for not all the tunnels and chambers had been explored, not even a small portion of them. Eventually, those below found access again to the light of day.
So you are saying that there is a rebellion occurring at the heart of the Valyrian Empire?
Asks Eldarion.
How do you know this is not of the past or of the future?
Elmarié reflects on this question for a few moments, and then replies,
I suppose that I do not know. It seemed present to me, but that is one of the things that could be my own interpretation. I wish there was a way to confirm it.
There may be a way. We just need to discover it.
Another thing needs to be said, however, about what I saw.
Continues Elmarié.
It seems to answer some questions that we have had, you most of all. I hope that somehow it may also give us light for the path going forward, though I know not yet how precisely.
And what is that?
In the lowest depths of the caverns, creatures of darkness were awakened, and they waged war against the inhabitants of the prison. It was this that spurred them on anew to seek for a way of escape. And yet the Empire, too, learned of these creatures, and
that is how the plan was first conceived, to join with them in order to quell the rebellion here in Telmerion.
Eldarion concludes for her.
Exactly.
I understand how they could trace the Eotenga back to our land, for from here they originated. In fact, I did not know that their presence had spread anywhere beyond our continent, However, I still do not understand how they thought that such creatures would be amenable to dialogue and cooperation. Was anything revealed to you in that regard?
I'm afraid not,
replies Elmarie with a shrug of her shoulders. After this, Eldarion lowers his head, leaning his chin against the palm of his hand, and he thinks of the import of Elmarie's dream. She too leans in, bringing her head nearer to his, as if such proximity would aid them both in thinking, though in fact she is drawn by the implicit desire to be closer to him in this place. After many moments have passed, Eldarion raises his head and says,
I do not yet understand the meaning of what was revealed to you, at least insofar as it summons us to action. If it is true that the events you beheld are currently unfolding, then we may take hope that Telmerion does not stand against the corrupt state of the Empire alone. But what it means for our own journey I cannot say. Even the presence of the creatures of darkness on other continents and in the earth beneath the very heart of the Empire, I do not know what this means.
He sighs and runs his hand absent-mindedly over the deep scars on his left cheek. Then he adds,
To be honest, if anything, it causes me to feel more overwhelmed. For if I am called upon to expel these creatures and to free our people from their oppression, how am I to do so if they also reside in other lands?
I understand that feeling, and I feel it myself.
Elmarie says.
And yet, will it really make a difference either way? For if you are called to confront the darkness in its very origin, to break the power of the one who has first fashioned these beasts, then it should not matter how many of them there are, or how widespread is their presence in this world.
Eldarion shakes his head doubtfully.
Perhaps you are right, but I cannot help sensing that the more of these horrors that have been given shape, the more of the wickedness and evil that there shall be to break. For it is of this that they have been made.
I think that the weight of human guilt and evil, the darkness in this world, remains regardless of whether it is fashioned into Ertenga or not.
Elmarie says, hesitantly following this train of thought.
And that no human gift alone can atone. If I recall correctly, Cillian was very clear about this truth. Your task is another, lesser role, a small share in a greater work, and a humble preparation for the true Dawnbringer, the one whose name is most rightly and truly Lightbringer.
Eldarion nods.
You are right. Cillian said that I was tasked with removing these forms of darkness from the grasp of the one who fashions them into the shapes of our enemies. No more, no less. And yet that itself is so far beyond me, both in thought and in action, that I can only walk forward in trust, and it feels that I walk from darkness into darkness.
Is it not true that all of us can only walk in trust? It is the nature of our life within this world,
says Elmarie.
The future always remains dark, for we know not what it holds. But we do know the most important thing of all, for we have the promise that after every darkness, however deep it may be, enduring light awaits, undimmed and unbreakable.
Yes, the Druidak appeared directly in the city with the coming of the night. Normal methods of resisting siege, therefore, are useless against them.
Rorlane and Eldarion sit in council with Brima. At this moment, he is questioning them concerning the assault on Ristfand in hopes of aiding and abetting the preparation for a coming attack upon Onilanden. Only 3 days have passed since the sacrifice of the cult members in the heat of Dragonfire, and these days have been a flurry of activity.
I myself stood in wait upon the battlements, prepared to defend against a siege from without by the forces of the Empire, only to spend the time of fighting, leading a company of men through the streets of the city, there combating the creatures of darkness. They will not fight like a normal army, but rather seek only to kill indiscriminately man and woman, young and old. To them it matters not. They come only to destroy.
If this is the case, how then can I protect my people?
Brima asks, lines of worry marking his features, lines that have been deepening over the previous days, and now crease his expression almost to a grimace.
Is evacuation and flight the only answer? Is there another alternative? And would that not only expose them to danger upon the road?
If the attack is aimed at the city, then flight is a viable option,
Answers Eldarion.
Those who flee could escape the notice of the Druidach, whose gaze would be fixed upon the city. The only other option is for all the civilians to lock themselves in their houses and to bathe them in light, with brightly burning hearths and torches. Brilliant natural light is the only resistance that an ordinary, untrained person can offer against these creatures. While it does not harm them, it can keep them from appearing within the houses themselves, for to do this they need shadow and darkness. But this too raises the question of barricading the doors and keeping the creatures outside. Our best option would be to have all trained fighters scour the streets and seek to put a stop to the raging of the Druidach, while those unable to fight directly take refuge inside. So it was in Ristfand.
That is true.
Rorlane adds,
However, they are vicious fighters, and since the events at the Black Castle in the heart of the Yend Mountains, and the unleashing of whatever beasts of darkness arose from the depths of the earth, we know not what other forms of Eöten we may encounter. I fear that our strength of arms will be far from enough.
That is my fear.
says Brima.
For even a single dragon has been able to wreak havoc among my people, and has eluded all our efforts at resistance. I am afraid that flight is the only viable option that I see before me, unless it be relying upon the light that you wield.
Eldarion and Rorlane share a meaningful glance for a moment, and then Eldarion, turning to Brima, says,
The light indeed has the power to dispel many of these creatures at once, but I fear that, for the simple limits of our presence and our strength, it shall not be enough to defend an entire city.
The limits of your strength?
Yes. Channeling the light takes a great toll upon the wielder, and after only a short time, depending upon the intensity of the light which he calls forth, he finds himself spent. In the most complete circumstances, he will find himself waking up in bed.
Or perhaps worse.
Rorlane comments quietly.
What then do you recommend?
Asks Brima.
It is difficult, not knowing the time of their arrival nor their number. We have only vague knowledge deduced from the words of the cult leader, and Syrian and Rumdil are still looking into the matter. But my suggestion would be that you send all the civilians west to safety in another city. However, I fear that eyes are directed upon us that would see such an action and utilize it against us. That would, I suspect, lead to an even greater massacre in the open with very little protection either from light or from walls than would trying to resist the assault within the city itself.
You really think we are being watched?
Considering the nature of our enemy, I would think it almost certain.
After a deep sigh, Eldarion continues,
All of this reveals to me more vividly how necessary is the task entrusted to me, and how pressing is the need to set upon it as soon as possible. For the Druidach come, and our resistance against them is frail and faltering. The only way to stop them for good is to cut off their power at the source. And this I must do. Yet I know not where to go to find the origin of their power, even if its nature I can in some way guess.
So there is no hope?
asks Brima.
There never was much hope, at least not immediately visible to the eyes or stored up in the resources of our own hearts.
Then we stay and give what resistance we can.
Brima offers, the regret and despair evident in his voice.
I suggest so.
Says Rawlane, and Eldarion nods as well.
And we should give unto all, citizens and warriors alike, weapons and flame and light. The Druidak are slain by piercing of the heart or removal of the head, and thus they fight no longer, at least for a time. If their general is with them, with his slaying, they shall cease to fight altogether. He is distinguished from the rest both by size and by the fact that he alone can give voice to thought in speech. Practically speaking, slaying the general may be our only hope to bring their attack to a conclusion. However, the problem is that he may command them from a distance.
That is enough.
Brima sighs and then more forcefully,
Enough. I have heard enough. In all that you say, I hear one thing. It is impossible. There is little to no hope, but we have no choice but to resist anyway. Fine. That is what we shall do.
I shall do all in my power. We shall do all in our power to aid you in this resistance,
says Eldarion.
I wish I could give you more assurance, but all that I can do is stand by your side in the struggle.
Yes, and I am sorry for my outburst.
Brima responds, making an effort to calm himself.
I know that you are doing all that you can. It just does not seem to be enough. Not nearly enough.
It is not enough,
says Rawlane.
but it is all that we have.
Eldarion ventures further words, even though Brima seems to have reached his limit.
If we can withstand the attack of these creatures, we will have an opportunity to make another plan, which shall certainly include increasing our forces and our defenses against those who assail us. In the meantime, we shall do all that we can within our limited time and resources to prepare to resist this oncoming assault. It need not be the end, but the beginning of fruitful resistance to the forces of darkness.
It is very difficult to believe that such could be the case.
Brima remarks.
And yet so we must believe if we are to act at all,
Replies Eldarion.
and there are grounds for such belief, as slim and as weak as they may appear. It is my plan to direct my attention to the strongest and most threatening of the creatures, the dragon, and any of the greater Urtenga, and hopefully thus to locate their general or another leader, if others they have. In the meantime, Rawlane shall head up the defense of the city from the bulk of their forces. This we have already discussed.
To this, Brima only nods silently, clearly feeling uneasy and out of his depth, willingly having delegated the leadership of his forces and the defense of his city into the capable hands of these two men. If such delegation would be a sign of weakness in another man, in Brima it appears only to be strength and courage. For being the sole surviving heiress of the people of Telmerion, many would expect him to exert his power still more forcefully, or at least to insist upon his station. Instead, he has graciously welcomed the aid of these travelers from the east, and has made his heart and his city an open and hospitable space for the one who stands revealed before him as the promised king. And Eldarion, for his part, does not let his gratitude and humble awe go unnoticed, for rare is the man in all ages of history who is willing to yield the authority which he has long wielded into the hands of another who comes to supplant him. But it is an unspoken understanding between them that Eldarion does not come to supplant. He does not in fact come to rule at all. He comes to protect and to save. The kingship entrusted to him is something that he has accepted, but he wears it as a gift that is not his own, something that belongs to another, and of which he is only a steward. And if Eldarion, granted a gracious conclusion to these terrible days, becomes the future king, is so vividly aware of his own role of stewardship, how can Brima not recognize that his role has also always been one of steward? That, at least, is the way that Brima sees it, and he is not even aware himself of the degree to which this disposition is a mysterious grace, fashioned within him by invisible forces throughout his life, both in its most intimate and hidden movements, as well as in the unfolding external events of his life's journey.
I want to say,
Remarks Brimmer at last, after a long moment of silence,
that you have the making of a true king. There is something in you that is not in myself. You speak with something more than courage, something that I can only term hope, born of faith. I can only try to hope too, in my small measure, that this beautiful flame that flickers within you shall not be snuffed out by the chill winds that come upon us, or engulfed in the anguishing darkness that grows day by day, threatening to swallow up our people in endless night.